Stuff. A news story that affects the industry. So click the link in the description, enter that by duplicating it. It's the donut because we want the icing around the donut. So let's just reuse this information. So we can do that by duplicating the object. And if you don't know the hotkey for it, you could just go object and then you'd find it here where it says Shift D. So Shift D. Now, when you hit that, you are in a placement state, essentially. Like it's duplicated and it's now saying, where do you want to place it? Now, in our case, and actually often, you don't actually want to change its placement. You want to duplicate it exactly where it was. So you can cancel the movement by hitting escape or right clicking. Now, when you do that, it looks like it's canceled the duplication, but you can see in your outliner, it has duplicated it. You've got two objects, but it's just in the exact same place, which is what we want. So first things first, we need to name them or else we could get very confused very easily. So you can name an object by just double clicking it in the outliner and then just typing in the object. The other way you can name something, I'll just show you the second way. If you select the Taurus 0.001, that's your icing object. If you're in the 3D view, where your cursor, is over the 3D viewport, if you hit F2, that's another very quick way that you can name something without having to go up to the outliner to find your object. So with our icing object selected, let's go into edit mode by hitting tab. So we want the icing on the top, which means this bottom half of our mesh here is redundant. Don't need it. So we want to delete it. So if we just dragged over the bottom here, you can see it looks like we've selected the bottom half of our donut, but if you were to move around, you would see, oh, we haven't actually. It's only selected, annoyingly, what is facing the camera. Where there's a mesh, it's not gone through the mesh. A lot of users find this annoying. I agree. Sometimes it seems like that would be the more default one that would make more sense, but anyway, don't want to argue. So if you want to select through a mesh, you can go up to here in your top navigation, toggle X-ray. If you turn that on, it's going to enable you to see through the mesh. And now, when I drag over it, you can see that I have selected all through the mesh as I move around it. By the way, you might find it like when you're in this state, it's kind of hard to select. Like it's easy to kind of accidentally select what is above it, and depending on what you've got at your end, that might have happened already. So another way to easily just look directly on the side-on of your donut is to just click one of these, like in your gizmo here, instead of just dragging around, just do a single click on either the green one or the red one, the X or the Y. And now we're in that state. You can see it's flattened it, so it's put you in orthographic mode, which actually you can toggle to at any time, just over there, which just makes it easier to just do a single, all the way through the mesh, select. All right, okay. All right, so we want to delete that. So just hit the delete key. You get an extra option here of what do you want to delete, edges, faces. You want the vertices. And now we have, if we go back to object mode, and then let's turn off toggle X-ray as well. And you can see it's working. You got half the donut on top of itself, but as you move around, you can see you get some flickering. Now, this flickering happens, and it's actually a very common, it's actually a good warning sign to you as an artist, because it means you've got faces on top of faces, and the 3D software doesn't know which face it wants to render, right? So it's like sometimes saying it's the front face, no, the back face, the front face. Now we know how Blender functions, let's start building that donut. So, as before, let's, well, first of all, just to repeat, make sure you are working with a new scene. Completely new scene, don't want any remaining monkey heads lying around. Let's begin fresh slate, and let's delete our default cube, just with the delete key. Uh, Select it. Way around, they're usually a little bit flatter. So what I want to do is I want to select these vertices along here, and then I want to shrink them. Now I could go around one by one like this, which is actually what I used to do when I was learning Blender pre-YouTube days, and there was no tutorials. What I would do this if I wanted to select this. Silly, because there's a function, a tool for that, and it is edge select. So if you hold down Alt on your keyboard and then do a single left click on not the points, but on the edge, right, this little line here, you can see it's selected all the way around. So and there's no understanding. Sometimes you can actually spot it in TV shows and like VFX or like low budget stuff. You can see something flickering in the background, and I'm like, ooh, there it is, Z fighting. That's what it's called, Z fighting, or Z fighting if you're not American. So what we want to do is we want to give thickness to our icing. So we can do that with a solidify modifier. So adding another modifier, make sure you've got your icing selected, not your donut. And then here where you've got add modifier, we're going to go generate solidify. Okay. Now it's made it worse. It's actually added a thickness to our mesh there, but it's actually done it the wrong way. So it's with the normals. Yeah, what is it? It's trying to put the extra bit inside the donut. So we can change that by just changing the offset here in the solidifier settings. Just drag that all the way to 1. Some of you might have actually found that it was correct before, just depending on which way your normals were. If that's the case, keep it at -1, but everyone else keep it at 1. We just want to make sure it's actually outside. Okay. I also, let's just increase the thickness a little bit too. Let's go, yeah, 0.025. That looks pretty good. And great, we've got what looks like a yarmulke on our donut, a perfectly straight edge little hat for our donut. So let's make this look more like icing. So the edge is wavy all the way around. So to do this, this is where we get into the fancy were. If that's the case, keep okay. I also, let's just increase the thickness a little bit too. Let's go, yeah, 0.025. That looks pretty good. And great, we've got what looks like a yarmulke on our donut, a perfectly straight edge little hat for our donut. So anything that's connected along that line is now selected. Fix that in a moment. If you right click with your object selected, go to shade smooth. And look at that, this is immediately. Let's make this look more like icing. So the edge is wavy all the way around. So to do this, this is where we get into the fancy, finger magic, because you're typing lots of keys. Anyway, go into edit mode, and we can see straight away that we can't see the mesh, and that's because the solidify modifier is obstructing our view. So these little boxes here, as I mentioned before, like this is to hide it from viewport. But if you want to just hide it from your edit mode, which is the state that we are in right now, the box next to it is the one that you uncheck, which means in object mode, when you're tabbed in object mode, you can still see it, but edit mode, your check, which means which is the state that we are in right now, the box next to it is the one that you uncheck, which means in object mode, when you're tabbed in object mode, you can finger magic and look. And I've actually found, but everyone else keep it at 1. We just want to make sure it's actually outside. Okay. I also, let's just increase the thickness a little bit too. Let's go, yeah, 0.025. That looks pretty good. And great, we've got what looks like a yarmulke on our donut, a perfectly straight edge little hat for our donut. So let's make this look more like icing. So the edge is wavy all the way around. So to do this, this is where we get into the fancy, finger magic, because you're typing lots of keys. Anyway, go into edit mode, and we can see straight away that we can't see the mesh, and that's because the solidify modifier is obstructing our view. So these little boxes here, as I mentioned before, like this is to hide it from viewport. But if you want to just hide it from your edit mode, which is the state that we are in right now, the box next to it is the one that you uncheck, which means in object mode, when you're tabbed in object mode, you can still see it, but edit mode, it's, it's temporarily hidden for you. So if I was to select one of these points here and move it down, you can see that it's working, but it would be, again, a lot of effort to go round and round and do these one by one. So we want to use that old familiar proportional fall off tool again. So proportional editing on, and now as I move it down, let's just lower the slider way down here, and then let's pull this down. Okay, now we'll find issues. If we move to the side here, we can see the first issue we've discovered is that this is separating from our mesh here. And that's not what icing does. When it dribbles down, it follows the shape of the donut all the way down. So what we want to do, okay, now we'll find issues. If we move, and then let's pull this down. Okay, now we'll find issues. If we move to the side here, we can see the first issue we've discovered is that this is separating from our mesh here. And that's not what icing does. When it dribbles down, it follows the shape of the donut all the way down. So what we want to do is snap, undo it a number of times, snap the vertices to our donut underneath it, right? So for that, we need to turn on snapping up here. Okay, now there are a number of ways to snap in Blender. The default way is increment, which just means the like the grid floor there. Like if you were to just like move it around, you can see it's just snapping to the grid floor. Not helpful. But we want to snap it to the face. And now with face snapping enabled, if we move this down, we can see, let's just look here, that the bottom bit is snapping to the face, but as you might have seen, the top bits, the rest of essentially what is inside, let's just look here, snapping enabled. If we move this down, we can see, let's just look here, that the bottom bit is snapping to the face, but as you might have seen, the top bits, the rest of essentially what is inside of our circle of influence with this proportional editing, that's not being affected. Only the little point that we had selected was affected. So that's not what we want either. Normally that would be enough, but in this particular case, we want to also snap individual elements too. And let's go face project. Now, when we pull this down, you should, let's go face project. Particular case, we want to also snap individual elements too. And let's go face project. Now, when we pull this down, you should see that these are also no longer clipping through the donut. But still, we have issues. Why is that? Well, it is actually working correctly. We can see these are not going through the mesh. So why does it look like it is? The reason for that is that there's actually just not enough information here. So if we go side on, you can see, right, like we've got this point here, and then we've got another point down here, and then we've got this long stretch in between, right? So that means that this part of the donut, oh gosh, that goes that goes around like that is just not, there's nothing to snap it to, essentially. So what we need to do to fix this is just add more geometry. So these little vertices here, we need more of those vertices. So we can do that by actually using the subdivision surface modifier. Because although it is a modifier, you can apply the modifier. And the modifier currently is adding geometry, so let's just apply it. So to apply it, we just click this little drop down here next to the modifier and then go apply. Now, if we, nothing should have changed from this view because the same information is being displayed. But in edit mode, you should now see exponentially more faces, because here, where there was, one face before, you can see there's now a lot more, right? 4x, okay, 4x. Okay, so now if we pull down, we should see it is snapping. And if we go into this mode, you can see that it's now conforming to the mesh in a much more snug way, because there's information there for it to use. Now this shading artifact here that we can see, this don't worry about that, we'll fix that in just a moment. But I need to show, because I've shown you like 4 things that we need to enable for this to work. I got to show you one more, because if I pull down and if I scroll up, you'll see something. Okay, if I was to click, we get this horrible problem here. And I've done this tutorial on enough, and enough people have hit this issue that I need to call it out specifically, because it seems to be a big point that a lot of people just don't know where to go from. What's happened is if we use what's it called, the circle of influence for our proportional editing, if that is so high, it's actually high enough to reach the mesh. On the other side of the donut, and then because we've got snapping, it's now projecting that, snapping it to the front, which is creating this something that's a nightmare to fix. I mean, in fact, it's easier just to start from scratch than to try to fix that. Now, horrible that we can see modify, you can apply it. So to apply it, we just now if we, see, should have changed exponentially more faces being displayed. But where there were, now if we pull down, we should see
Mm.
it is snapping. And if we go into this mode, you can see that it's now conforming to the mesh in a much more snug way, because there's information there for it to use. Now this shading artifact here that we can see, don't worry about that, we'll fix that in just a moment. But I need to show, because I've shown you like 4 things that we need to enable for this to work. I got to show you one more, because if I pull down and if I scroll up, you'll see something. Okay, if I was to click, we get this horrible problem here. And I've done this tutorial on enough, and enough people have hit this issue that I need to call it out specifically, because it seems to be a big point that a lot of people just don't know where to go from. What's happened is if we use what's it called, the circle of influence for our proportional editing, if that is so high, it's actually high enough to reach the mesh on the other side of the donut. And then because we've got snapping, it's now projecting that, snapping it to the front, which is creating this something that's a nightmare to fix. I mean, in fact, it's easier just to start from scratch than to try to fix that. So the other way you can name something, I'll just show you the second way. If you way down here, and then let's pull this, undo it, and it is actually working correct. Is way we get this. People just don't know where to go from. What's happened is if we use what's it called, the circle of influence for our proportional editing, if that is so high, it's actually high enough to reach the mesh on the other side of the donut. And then because we've got snapping, it's now projecting that, snapping it to the front, which is creating this something that's a nightmare to fix. I mean, in fact, it's easier just to start from scratch than to try to fix that. So if we want, sorry, there's a lot of noise. To fix this, we need to hide the part of the mesh that we don't want to be influenced by our proportional tool, right? So to do that, there is an easy way to do it. We can actually do it very precisely. So if with this middle bit of our donut here, if I just hold down Alt and then do a left click, as I mentioned before, that selects the ring, okay? And we could do that all the way up, but actually there's a little, I don't know if it's an Easter egg. It's kind of a cool tool that not many people know about. Control plus. That will enable the select more tool. And if you use control plus, control minus goes the other way. you can see that it's expanding out. So Control Plus will just like select the next vertex along a chain, roughly speaking. And you can see we can very quickly select all the parts of the mesh that we don't need, right? Very cool. By the way, if Control Plus doesn't work for you because you're on a laptop or something else, select more, less. You can also do it here. Anyways, to hide this part of the mesh, it's H. H for hide. So when you're in this state, it looks as though it's been deleted. It's very, sometimes to hide laptop or something else, select more, less. You can also do it here. Anyways, to hide this part of the mesh, it's H. H for hide. So when you're in this state, it looks as though it's been deleted. It's very, sometimes you don't know where part of your mesh and then you forgot that you've got hide turned on. If parts of your mesh are hidden and you want to bring it back, it's Alt H. So H to hide and then Alt H to bring it back. Or if you can't remember it for whatever reason, you can also find it. Okay, it's underneath mesh. There we go. Mesh. Reveal hidden or hide selected. Okay, so that's the other way. But you can get my keyboard shortcut that's in the link. It's free. Just use that and then you won't forget a lot of these handy shortcuts. All right, so now finally, after all that, after 4 different ways of and problems to explain, we can now take part of this mesh and drag it down, and it will work correctly. Haha. So now we get to now finally be an artist and go like, what sort of edge or what sort of icing do I want to make this look like? So what I'm doing here, by the way, is I'm hitting G to pull it down, and then I'm just middle click, single middle click, and then because my cursor is closest to the Z axis, it's now snapping it to the Z axis. So that's why I mentioned before that it's really handy. You don't have to think of the letter and type it in. You just go in the general direction you want to go, and then just tap the middle click of the which is your scroll wheel, right? Middle click. It's such a weird button that you have to call it out. It's the scroll wheel button because it's like no other application seems to use it besides scrolling. But Blender is like, no, we're going to use it for like 90% of the operations is going to be middle click. But anyways, as you can see, I'm not paying particularly too much attention to it, but I'm just making a wavy looking shape around it. You might also want to make some bits that go the opposite direction, right? And then maybe pull, so you've got like big shapes as well as medium shapes and some small shapes. Big, medium, small. It's the recipe for appealing design. Big, medium, and small details. But I digress. By the way, I should mention, if you're stuck, don't feel bad because there was certainly a lot of finickiness going on with this donut here, and we're definitely in the steep part of that curve at the moment. Do make use of my Discord if you are stuck. I created it literally so that people could get instantaneous help. I don't have any other benefit for it, so it's there so that you can find help. Link is in the description, and there's like donut help chat room where you can post screenshots of your problem and then people can help each other out. So do make use of that. Now, our shading issue here, this darkened edge, is actually going to fix itself by fixing another issue. So it's a 2 birds, 1 solution kind of problem. This 90-degree edge here for this icing, not ideal. Everybody knows that a real icing would create like a rounded edge there, right? Literally so that people moment. Do make use of my Discord if you are stuck. I'm only in the steep finickiness stuck. Don't forget this link is of your problem and then people can help each other out. So do make use of that. Now, our shading issue here, this darkened edge, is actually going to fix itself by fixing another issue. So it's a 2 birds, 1 solution kind of problem. This 90-degree edge here for this icing, not ideal. Everybody knows that a real icing would create like a rounded edge there, right? So we can fix that just by adding another subsurf modifier. Because you might remember I mentioned, like, yes, if you've got 3 vertices, it'll create like another vertex here and another vertex here, but it'll also like round it out. It'll pull this one back, so you end up with a rounded corner. So right here in your modifier stack, we're going to go add modifier, generate subdivision surface. Now, the order of these does matter. Okay, you want your solidifier at the top and the subdivision after it. So Blender works top to bottom, and it's important it's in this way because you want the extrusion to happen first, and then in order to round that edge, it has to happen as a secondary step. So solidify on top, subdivision underneath. Now, whilst we're here and we're looking at the close-up, nice little profile of this edge of this icing, another issue to call out, you can see it's got this this shape that goes around. Yes, so far so good. But then it goes up. And it's like, it'll be better if it went around and then tucked in and touched the edge of it, because that would look more like real liquid would. So we can solve that by just changing one of the settings in the solidify modifier. It's not one of those things that you would figure out or know where it is. It's just over time you learn where some of these settings are. But essentially here, the edge data. So we want to change the edge data to say that before you do the solidify step, add a crease on the inner part right here. If we increase this all the way to 1, it now creates a sharpened edge just on that inner part there. So the rest of it is a smoothed edge, but the middle one, there's a crease, so it's making a sharp edge there. And it just gives it, it's just a little bit more realism. Just looks a little bit closer to what you would imagine real icing would do. Okay, now for the cool bit. All right, so if you look at reference of donuts, right, yes, you've got these little wavy bits, but where the icing is really liquidy, it'll often break off from this wave here, and it'll create a trail that goes down underneath the donut, right? It just sort of drips all the way down. Whoops, bumped the microphone. So we can do that, but not the way we were doing it before. If we just took one of these points and then like dragged it all the way down like that, there wouldn't be enough information there, right? You can see you just get this like stretched look, and it doesn't look great, okay? So essentially we need to give it more information, and we couldn't just do it by like adding more and more subdivision surfaces. We need to actually like break this shape here and create a new shape that goes down. So we need to extrude. So if I select this vertex and then the one next to it by holding down shift, I don't think I mentioned it, but yeah, if you want to select 2 things at once, it's shift select. Anyways, so if we select 2 vertices like that, we want to extrude it downward by hitting E. So when you tap E, it's similar to G in that you're in a placement state now, saying where do you want to place this? So I'm going to move it down to, yeah, like about there where I want the trail to stop, and I'm just going to do click, left click, and it's now placed it there. Now, it's hard to see it, but if I just switch to wireframe, you can see what it's doing. So it's created this breakaway shape here, an entirely new face that's completely separate to what we've got there currently. And what this means is if we go to object mode, you can see it's not just like continuing this form here, it's pulled it down, right? Which is exactly what we want. And in fact, I want it to go even further than that. So I'm going to select those 2 vertices, and I'm going to pull it down again, and then I'll do it again. And the reason I've done this 1, 2, 3 is that this detail here is important so that it conforms to the shape of the donut. Because if there's not enough, you're going to have that clipping issue that I showed you earlier. So that's pretty good. And now we're going to do it again. Originally in my earlier versions of the donut, I only did like 1 of these, but then I noticed that in the render, the final render, it's often the most interesting part of the donut. So now I'm thinking, yeah, just do it all the way around the donut. Just add the bit that looks cool. Add more of that. So here, so wherever there's essentially like a big dip is what I'm looking for. Like where the liquid would sort of build up, and then like the surface tension there would be just too much, and then it would break away. And it would go down, down underneath like that. And we'll do another one here, why not? Like that, and down, and down. And that's pretty good. Haha, lovely. So that concludes finally this heavy part of the tutorial. So if you're ready to watch the next part, I hope you're not giving up. You can click there on the screen and I'll see you there. Make sure you hit subscribe as well if you haven't. A large number of you don't, but if you want to see more Blender tutorials, that's what you need to do. Self-promotion right there. Thank Thanks, guys. See you in the next part. Congrats. You didn't give up. You made it to part 4. You clicked on the next part of the video. There's always like less viewers each video as you go down. So you're here. Well done. Thumbs up. As you can tell by the title of this video, we're going to learn about sculpting. But first, I should call out, if you have a problem with your mesh now, those problems can be amplified the further you go along. So it helps to do a technical check now to make sure you don't have any problems before we move along. So to look for it, go into edit mode. And first of all, by the way, if you can't see that middle part of your mesh, it's because you remember we temporarily hid it. So you can bring it back by hitting Alt-H, and that will bring back the rest of the mesh. And then we're looking for issues with the mesh, like right here. So this is a really common problem following this tutorial, because when you're projecting parts of the mesh, if it was like side on to the camera, it will project it that way, and then you can have like overlapping parts of the mesh. So that creates this artifact here, which will be exaggerated when we add more detail to it. So we just want to drag that back. So turn on snapping, and I'll keep proportional turned off, and then I'm just going to move this back over here just to move each of these points back. Another very common problem is you might have parts that have separated from your mesh. Now you can quickly fix this if you just like selected the point and then hit G to move it. When you're in that state, it's also snapping it to the mesh. Now you could do that all the way along, like select, tap G, then click, select, tap G, then click. But that's, anybody's got time for that. Let's make Blender do the work for us. So there's a tool that's just designed for this, and it's called the Shrink Wrap Modifier. So over to our trusty modifier stack, we're going to add yet another modifier. So add modifier. It's not under generate, it's under deform, which we haven't accessed before. New modifiers. Ooh, the one we're looking for is shrink wrap. And first of all, hasn't done anything because it needs to know what the target is. What is the mesh that we're shrink wrapping our mesh to? So with this little eyedropper tool, you can see when you've clicked it, my cursor's changed to an eyedropper. And now if I hover over objects, I got the name of it. So I want to click on the object that is the donut, and now it's snapped to the donut and made it worse. Why, Andrew, would you make us do that? Remember, the order of your modifier stack matters. So the reason this happened is because we've done it after the solidify modifier. So if it works top to bottom, we want the shrink wrap to happen before any of the extrusion happens. So now that it's there, it's correct. And this is what it looks like before, and this is after. And it's subtle, right? And you'll probably see this across your mesh, like little subtle changes where maybe it just separated off the mesh, which wasn't quite a perfect alignment, but this will just correct that. So great, we don't need this here now. We can just apply it because it was just a once-off operation, and now all our mesh should be perfectly flat. And assuming you haven't got any other issues going on, again, make sure you use my Discord. If you do have issues and you need someone to help, make use of the community. So use that and post your problem, and I'm sure people can help out. All right, so we want to do some sculpting. Now, why do we want to sculpt? Well, because if you look at reference photos of donuts with icing on them, you'll see that icing is obviously a liquid, and liquid does weird things. One of the weird things that it does is that it will pool in certain areas. It's not like a uniform amount all the way on it. So the most obvious being like at the end of this trail here, there would be more that would accumulate at the end there. And I think the reason for it is that because it's a viscous fluid, once it runs out of enough fluid, there's not enough to kind of push it forward, but there's enough for it to build up. So you would have like a build up here on each of these ends, but you would also have build ups all along the edge. And you can see it in reference photos. Like here, we've got this like clear, was it like a glaze? And basically the areas there where it looks whiter, that's a thickened area. So we essentially want to replicate that across our donut. So we can't do that currently. Like if you go into edit mode, we don't have any mesh to work with because the extrusion, the thickened part, is happening via this modifier. So we need to make the modifier real. So again, we're just going to apply it. Drop down, apply. Now in edit mode, we have that part of the mesh to work with. So we could, if you wanted to, come in here and like select the points that you want to add, a bulge to, and then very carefully come in and tap G, and then, oh, I've got snapping turned on, turn that off. Pull this out, right? And go like that and go, yep, there's a little bulge there, but that's very tedious to first select a point, then tap a key to move it. It's very tedious. So that's really like you just need to use another tool to do the job. So edit mode is one tool, and it's good for like very precise things when you need to get precise things. But for more like organic shapes, more freehand stuff, that's where sculpting comes in. So at the top here, we've just been flipping between object and edit mode, but the one underneath it is sculpt mode. So when we go into that mode, you'll see that we have on the left-hand side all of these tools that appear. And I mean, this isn't a sculpting like tutorial really. We're just really going to scratch the surface, but they do different things, different sculpting things. Like let's just use the default tool here. Can't really see much happening. Let's just turn up the strength and the size of it. Like it just pulls out that part of it. And even that quick little one stroke, imagine if you had to select each of those points and pull them out one by one. Like that's why this tool is the appropriate tool for this kind of job, right? Because it's just very quickly going to enable us to add lots of complex shape. Very cool. So the tool that we're looking for is actually, it's this one, the inflate brush, which is just conveniently the I hotkey, inflate. By the way, if you want to change the size of brushes in Blender, I mean, you've got these ones here. You've also got the strength slider here. But there is a hotkey just to change the size of the brush with F. So F to change the size of the brush. And you just pull out with your cursor to make it bigger, and then pull in to reduce it, and then do a single left click to confirm. You can also change the strength with Shift F. So Shift F, pull out, click, and then Shift F, pull in, click. Anyways, so if I was to draw on this, you can see that I'm inflating that edge. I could also inflate here, but you very quickly realize, like, look at that. Look at that. What is that, right? The eye is going to see that. As a pro tip, your eye is like, if you're going low res, don't go low res for things that are round, because your eye is very quickly going to spot low poly things. Actually, just last night I was playing Spider-Man, the Miles Morales one, and there was like this coffee cup that was on a table, and then you walk, and it looks fine, like as a background asset, but then part of it, the mission, you had to go up and read something on the table, and you had to get close to this coffee cup, and it was like 8 vertices. It just looked like almost looked like a nut on a wheel of a car, right? Just like that jagged. So, anyways, what I'm saying is this is a rounded form, so we need more information. We need more detail to sculpt on. The reason this is jagged and the reason there's not enough detail here is that just even though we have a subsurf modifier, a subdivision modifier, it's applying it after we do the sculpt mode. So when you're in sculpt mode, it's still just using your raw mesh here, and then it does this as a secondary step. So if we want to sculpt into this detail, we need to apply this. So I'm going to use more than one. I'm going to use 2 because I want to have even more detail. So importantly, by the way, if you're applying a subdivision modifier, even though you've got 2 levels here, it will always use just the viewport. So your render amount here could be whatever, but when you hit apply, it's just going to apply whatever is in the viewport. So I'm going to go 2 levels and hit apply. Now look at this. Whoo. We have 16 times the detail because we had level 1, which would be 4x, a 4x multiply, and then 4x of 4x, 16. So we have 16 times the vertices to play with. So now when we go into sculpt mode, look at it now. When we sculpt, look at that. So much more room to work with. and much more fun. So now that I'm in that state, I'm going to just do little circles with this brush on each of these points here. And the reason I'm doing like little circles like this is that by default, the stroke state is, what is it, space. You can switch it to airbrush if you want, and then you can just click and hold it there. But I find that to actually be like harder to control. So I just keep it in space mode and then just do like little circles. And then that enables you to just kind of continue adding more pressure as you move your mouse. So a little circle like that. And there you go. Very quickly, already we have a more interesting looking shape across it. So another brush, another tool, I guess you call, is it a brush or is it, I think these technically are called brushes. But anyways, another one that you use all the time is grab, and conveniently it's the hotkey G. And what this does is just like pushing clay with your finger. It's like eh, 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 eh. It's really cool. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm actually just exaggerating the design. Because that is what makes appealing design. It's exaggerating the addition and subtraction that you see in a shape, even though in the real world you might not see this like tapered thing like that. Because it's got this bulbous end, you want to draw more attention to that kind of globule at the end there. And to do that, yeah, if you just make this a little bit tapered using this tool, it can do that. And we get to learn about a new tool in Blender, which is the whole point of this tutorial. So, yeah. All right, pull this around, pull this around. Just click and drag and click and drag. I could change the shape, size of the brush with F. And you've got more time than me, so maybe make this better than what I'm doing really quickly. But just get, generally a shape like that, and it should look a little nicer. Okay, so now let's do that raised edge all the way around the rim of this. Now, in previous versions of this tutorial, I said just use the inflate brush and then just like draw across it. The problem with this is that this is so imprecise, and you can accidentally like draw over another bit, and then you look at it side on and you get these like noticeable like divots across the donut. And it's very hard to do because you keep like accidentally clicking off it and then on it, and you get this like jagged like dig 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 dig. It's not very appealing. The point is, so let's go back. We can learn about another tool. It's another excuse to learn about another tool across. It's not very appealing. Clicking off it and then on it, and you get this like jagged like dig 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 dig. It's not very appealing. The point is, so let's go back. We can learn about another tool. It's another excuse to learn about another tool, and that tool is called the mask tool. So it's actually in the list here, but I never remember what it is. It's just hit M for mask, and it's this one. And what this enables you to do is, if you just draw on it, you get this grade shape, right? And then when you're using another tool, like say you switch to the inflate brush now, and if you draw over this, let me just increase this. Yeah, if you drew over this, you can see it's applying an inflation to everything except the area that is dark. And that's how you can create like, a skin lesion on a zombie or something like that. So a mask is very useful in sculpting, used a lot. And we're going to use it in just this case. What we're going to do is mask out just this area along the rim there. And then we're going to apply a constant inflate value to just the area that we've masked. So first use the mask tool. Mask. And it doesn't really make sense to use like a half opaque mask. So we're going to set the strength all the way to 1. And then I'll use a brush size about here. So essentially, where do I want the inflation? Like, do I want this much inflation on the rim? No, probably something about here. And then I'm just going to paint a darkened value all the way across it. I just want to make sure that it's, fairly even. It doesn't have to be completely perfect, but fairly even across it. And I obviously don't want it to be in this part because that, the liquid has flowed all the way down and it's broken the trail and it's gone down there. So I don't want any raised area there. And again, I apologize if this was like tedious, but it's a way to learn Blender piece by piece. Okay, hey, speaking of which, I forgot. With the sculpt tools in Blender, for whatever reason, it has assumed by default that you might want to sculpt on the other side of your mesh. So you can see I've got this smear here, and that's because somewhere I was painting over here, I went through the mesh and it painted on the other side of the mesh over there. Very annoying. So I can undo it. It's just easier than like repainting that whole thing. And what you want to do with your mask tool is underneath brush, set it to front faces only. And that means when you paint, it should mean that as you draw, it could still happen, just be careful, but it should happen less. It shouldn't happen like on the opposite side of the same mesh. Anyways, it should happen less. By the way, I didn't call it out because it's not essential, but if you do ever want to isolate and only see the selected object, / is the isolation mode. So / on the number pad or the actual normal keyboard will pull you in and out of that state. Anyway, so now with the mask brush, with front faces only enabled, I can paint along it, and it should happen less, essentially. All right, I don't know what to say, but this doesn't take long once you've set it up. And assuming you've got the strength of 1, by the way, you don't want to have areas with like half opaque, right? Because we want to have a constant value across it as we inflate it. And we should get a nice raised edge that goes all the way along the donut. Okay, great. Just clean it up if you've got any areas that look a little untidy, a little unkempt. Yep, awesome. All right, so as I mentioned, the mask will actually mask out the area, so you can't paint on it. We obviously want to only paint on the area that we mask, so we want to invert it by just hitting Control I, same hotkey as Photoshop, etc. And then, obviously, if we went to the inflate brush and then we just painted, like, yes, we're only now painting onto that area, but it also doesn't solve our problem of like different values across it. So we want to apply a uniform inflation on just these areas. So there is a tool in the sculpt tools called, where is it? Mesh filter. So I will be honest, it's probably the laziest implementation of a tool in Blender. Like, mesh filters are not really well documented. You kind of have to just learn how they work. But unlike all these other brushes here, the way this one works is it's applying a uniform value to the entire mesh. So it doesn't actually matter where you click on the mesh, it's going to apply it. And it's applying what is in the filter types listed here. So if I just click, this is the other thing you have to learn. If I drag to the right, I'm inflating. If I drag to the left, I'm deflating and sort of subtracting the opposite direction. You just kind of have to learn that that's how this specific tool works. My theory is, by the way, to go on a rant, ZBrush's user experience and interface is so arcane, so badly hodgepodge together from ideas over the last 2 decades. They never had any thought in the process. They just lumped it all in there. And Blender's sculpting tools competes with that. So they're like, hey, yeah, the filter tools, yeah, they're not the easiest to understand, but at least we're not ZBrush. that's my theory. It's my working theory I'm going with. But anyways, point is now that we're in this, you can see we're applying a uniform value to everything. Hooray for us. I might also, I'm going to set the strength of this to 0.1, and that just means that as I move the cursor, it's applying less of a value for the movement, so I can use smaller movements. The other thing though is this is a little like, it almost looks, if we go into object mode, it looks like a tube almost around the edge of it. It's not very nice. Basically, the edge that we've got here is too hard, so we can smooth out that edge by using mask, smooth mask. Okay. Now, if we use the inflate, just to the right a little bit, I'm just going to go with that. Let's go object mode and see how that looks. That's pretty good. I might actually go just a little bit more, just exaggerate it slightly more. There we go. Great. So yeah, that's roughly it. Now there's a little bit of artifacting there because the way the mask works is it's kind of that feathering thing. It's not very exact and it's kind of got some values in between it. So we can smooth that out in sculpt mode by first of all just clearing the mask and then using the smooth tool. By default, it's too high, so just turn it down. And I'm just going to smooth that edge, and that'll sort of clear up some of this artifacting. It's a little too high. For whatever reason, the smooth tool, which also you can access at any point when you're in sculpt mode just by holding down shift, and it'll temporarily invoke the smooth tool, and it'll use the value that is on the smooth tool. So you'll be in this mode and then you hold down shift and it'll actually not use this value, but the value that's on the smooth. Rate it slightly more. There we go. Great. So yeah, that's roughly it. Now there's a little bit of artifacting there because the way the mask works is it's kind of that feathering thing. It's not very exact and it's kind of got some values in between it. So we can smooth that out in sculpt mode by first of all just clearing the mask and then using the smooth tool. By default, it's too high, so just turn it down. And I'm just going to smooth that edge, and that'll just sort of clear up some of this artifacting. It's a little too high. For whatever reason, the smooth tool, which also you can access at any point when you're in sculpt mode just by holding down shift, and it'll temporarily invoke the smooth tool, and it'll use the value that is on the smooth tool. So you'll be in this mode and then you hold down shift and it'll actually not use this value, but the value that's on the smooth tool. Again, ZBrush is the competitor, so some things are a little weird here. Anyways, so it's a little too high. Just turn it down, and now I've got a nice value. And I'm just smoothing this out to just clear up some of the artifacting all the way around the mesh. Ba-doop, boop, boop. And that's it. Lovely. Hey, if you've made it this far, 3D is in the cards. It's for you because we've done some fairly complex things. So if you're a beginner and you're just getting started in Blender, congrats, because it is a steep learning curve, but you have learned some very complex modeling and some sculpting. So congrats, you've made it this far. Why not continue on the series? Click here to see the next video, and I will see you in that part. This is where we finished at the end of the last part, and we are ready for Some materials. Before we continue, do a check over though, because I looked inside my donut and I saw this, which shouldn't be here, obviously. So make sure you don't have any hidden meshes that should definitely not be there. You've only got your camera, your donut, your icing, and your light. Okay? Okay, so materials. Let's do some materials. If we jumped into our render mode, that little button that I showed you on the first part that takes you into rendered view mode. You can see we've got a lamp and it's lighting our donut in a very depressing cold gray. So let's give it a material. Down here, the little material tab, and then we're going to hit new. So just like before, the one thing we're going to change is the color. Let's make it a nice pink color. And that looks pretty good. The other This is where we finished at the end of the last part, and we are ready for some materials. Before we continue, do a check over though, because I looked inside my donut and I saw this, which shouldn't be here, obviously. So make sure you don't have any hidden meshes that should definitely not be there. You've only got your camera, your donut, your icing, and your light. Okay. Okay, so materials. Let's do some materials. If we jumped into our render mode, that little button that I showed you on the first part that takes you into rendered view mode, you can see we've got a lamp and it's lighting our donut in a very depressing cold gray. So let's give it a material. Down here, the little material tab, and then we're going to hit new. So just like before, the one thing we're going to change is the color. Let's make it a nice pink color. And that looks pretty good. The other value that you typically want to change for a lot of objects is the roughness value. So you can see the further I go all the way to the left-hand side, the more it becomes a mirror. So all the way at 0 is basically a mirror. And then all the way becomes a other value. So just like before, the one thing we're going to change is the color. Let's make it a nice pink color. And that looks pretty good. The other value that you typically want to change for a lot of objects is the roughness value. So you can see the further I go all the way to the left-hand side, the more it becomes a mirror. So all the way at 0 is basically a mirror. And then all the way to the right is your like most porous object, like a brick or something like that. Basically something that looks like it doesn't have a reflection, although everything does. The roughness is just merely dissipating that reflection everywhere, so it appears as though it doesn't. But anyways, so we're going to go with like a point, yeah, 0.3, something like that. That's pretty good. And then for the base of our donut, we're going to give it another material, and let's go with a nice orangey yellow, which we will change later on, so it won't matter anyway. And let's go with a nice orangey yellow, which we will change later on, so it won't matter anyway. But that's good. Great. Look at us. We've got a donut. By the way, we'll add some subsurface SSS later on to make this look a little bit more milky, but for now this is good. Now we want to put our donut onto a marble countertop. So first of all, we need that countertop as a separate object. So Shift A, and the one we're looking for is again under mesh, and we're going to go with a plane. So a plane is just a square that's literally made up of 4 vertices. It's the simplest object, but the most versatile that you use it all over the place. I think I'll make this look a little bit bigger. So let's just scale that out with S and then click. Okay, so we want to make our donut rest onto the countertop. So if I selected my donut base and moved it up, well, there's a problem, right? We need to have both of these move together. So if you want to have one object basically attached to another object while still being its own separate object, you parent it. So the way we parent it is, first of all, you select the object that you want to follow the other object, so the child, and then you select the parent. So holding down Shift, I'm going to now click on the donut base, and then to parent, it's Control P. Okay. Or again, if at any time you don't know what it is, just hit F3 for search, and then we can just type in parent. Now, by the way, with parent, you get a number of options here. The one you actually want is keep transform. If you just do object, it means if you've ever moved the object like off its base or whatever like that, it'll then like clear its position. So it's actually not the one you want most of the time. So it's keep transform. Now that I've done that, if you've done it in the correct order, you should be able to select the base and then move it, and the icing should go with it. If it doesn't, it means it's probably parented the other way. So again, make sure the object you want to follow the other one is selected first, and then the parent is selected last. Okay. So now I'm going to move that up along its z-axis. So G, and then just middle tap and pull it up till it's resting on my counter. Haha, lovely. Now don't worry about this looking like cartoonishly bad in terms of realism. I'm going to show you a button later on, which is just going to make this look phenomenally. And we're going to go with a plain place. Okay, so we want to make our bigger. So let's just subject, but the most versatile, that you use it all over the place. And I'm going to make this look a little bit bigger. So let's just scale that out with S and then click. Okay, so we want to make our donut rest onto the countertop. So if I selected my donut base and moved it up, well, there's a problem, right? We need to have both of these move together. So if you want to have one object basically attached to another object while still being its own separate object, you parent it. So the way we parent it is, first of all, you select the object that you want to follow the other object, so the child, and then you select the parent. So holding down Shift, I'm going to now click on. So for our countertop here, we need to give it a new material. And then underneath the base color, you can select not just a color by clicking the color, but the little dot next to it, that little yellow thing doesn't look like a button, it is. If you click that, you get this pop-up, or pop-down in this point, which just gives you a number of options. And the one that we're looking for is image texture. So essentially, it's replacing that import from a flat color to an image texture property. And it's now black, and it's asking you what image texture. So we need an image texture. Now we could go to just Google Images and just find any old marble texture, download that. The problem usually with textures on the web is that what most people call a texture is not ideal for 3D. Most textures are good for websites, but for 3D, we need extra information to tell the 3D software how the material property looks. Like, how does it reflect light? What do the bumps look like across the surface? And all that information is never available on these sites. So to find those textures, you have to go to a separate dedicated website. And the website that I recommend is Polygon. And the reason I recommend it is because it's mine. It's my website. That's why I recommend it. No, I started it 8 years ago because I was pretty dissatisfied with the quality of the texture websites that were available at the time. So I used my YouTube money to invest in a team and some high-tech equipment. We went out into the world and we scanned stuff to a very high quality standard. And over the years, we've grown it to include models and HDRIs as well. And obviously, a lot of this stuff is paid, but we also have a free range. And obviously, we're going to be using a free texture for this part. So this is the free texture. This is the one we're going to use. And first of all, although it is free, you do need to sign up for an account. So you can just sign up with Google. That's usually the easiest one. It's a couple of onboarding questions. I would like to actually know how you, are you a professional? Are you a student? That's kind of interesting to me to know that. And then when you get to here, you're just going to say continue with free account. But power through that, and if you click the link in the description, again, this is the marble, and we just want to hit download. And you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, it's downloading. It is a large size, but this is because it's 8K, and we've got maps at like 16-bit depth to get all of that accurate information there. But once it is finished, it'll just appear in your downloads. Then you just unzip the zip file as you would normally. And then finally, you should see some glorious high-resolution images and ones with extra information like roughness. Very, very subtle, but will come through when we do the render. So back into Blender, where we've got that image texture, we're going to click on Open. Then navigate to where you unzipped it, and then just click on the one that ends with Better. Without getting too technical, this is kind of a fakery. It's sort of like the shader is telling the renderer that this is. And then finally, you should see some glorious high resolution images and ones with extra information like roughness. Very, very subtle, but will come through when we do the render. So back into Blender where we've got that image texture, we're going to click on open. Then navigate to where you unzipped it and then just click on the one that ends with COL in the name and then just hit open. And here it is. Okay. And it looks great up close. Only problem is, of course, look at that reflection. So bland, so fake. And as I mentioned before, close, only, and then just hit open. And then just click on the one that ends with COL in the name and then just hit open. And here it is. Okay. And it looks great up close. Only problem is, of course, look at that reflection. So bland, so fake. And as I mentioned before, fake is the enemy, and you need to squash it by just adding variance. So that's where our roughness map is going to come in. And while we could try to add it in here, this section on the right hand side, it's actually not where you do most of your material work, because this is kind of like a simplified, dumbed down version. It doesn't really, it gets a little bit complicated when you try and add too many things to it, because there's like too many menus and drop downs and all that kind of stuff. So instead, if you go to your shading tab at the top of the screen there, this will change the layout of the screen to something completely different we haven't seen before. And lots of windows, actually too many. I never actually need this one on the right hand side. So where you just mouse over where you've got the divider and then just right click and then say join areas. And then you want to join it to the left to close it. And then I'll do the same here because I've never needed those on the left. Mouse over where you've got the divider and then just right click and then say join areas, and then you want to join it to the left to close it, and then I'll click and then on the right hand side. So where you just mouse over where you've got the divider and then just right click and then say join areas, and then you want to join it to the left to close it, and then I'll do the same here because I've never needed those on the left hand side. So I've just got my view at the top here and then this one here. And the reason, by the way, this looks different than what we had before is because this is the material preview, but you can change it back to what we had before by clicking that. So material preview, by the way, it's the same. It's a render before by clicking that. So material preview, by the way, material preview, but you can change it back to what we had before by clicking that. So material preview, by the way, it's the same. It's a rendered mode, but it's using lights, a different light setup. Basically, just an HDRI, which is like a fake kind of light and reflection map, just so that you can quickly preview materials. And really, you could use either or. They both kind of show the material, but yeah, let's use this one. Okay, but the bit that we're looking for is here. So this section here is your node setup, and it's actually an exact duplicate of what we did over here, because this on the right hand side is the simplified version. If you're just doing like a quick change, you might want to use this, but over here, this is what's actually happening to it underneath the hood, right? So you can see as I change this on the right hand side, that is also changing there. So they are linked. So the way nodes work is basically a left to right function. So we start over here with our image texture. It goes into our shader, which is the material for this plane, and then it comes out into a material output, and that's what is fed into the final shader. So essentially, we could do anything. Like for example, and this is one of the value of nodes, is between these two nodes, we could add another node. Like for example, I could hit Shift A to add. Again, same hotkey, works everywhere. And then I could add in like a hue saturation value node. And then I could change the hue of my marble to look blue, right? Or something else. So that's the power of nodes, and you could just keep going. Saturation value node. And then I could change the hue of my marble to look blue, right? Or something else. So that's the power of nodes, and you could just keep going, adding in adjustments and everything you want. And then I could add in like a hue saturation value node. And then I could change the hue of my marble to look blue, right? Or something else. So that's the power of nodes, and you could just keep going, adding in adjustments and everything you want. So nodes, very, very flexible. They do look daunting because they get all these like, squid looking lines going everywhere, but it's very, very convenient, very customizable. Okay, but we want to add something to our roughness so that we don't have a flat single value roughness, which is what that is currently. We want to use that map that we just downloaded. So one, you could hit Shift A and then add an image text this way, but actually we could also just drag out from that input there and then just do a release, and it'll now say, what do you want to add in this input? And we could type in and then just do it this way. But actually, we could also just drag out from that input there and then just do a release, and it'll now say, what do you want to add in this input? And we could type in image texture, color, and then hit enter. Then here, go to that same place that we unzipped it, and then we're looking for the one with roughness in the name. So roughness in the name, and then hit open. Okay, so this is better, right? You can kind of see we've got some detail there, but it doesn't look quite right. Something is not going right. It's because when you add an image texture, Blender doesn't really know what type of information it is yet, and by default in the name. So roughness in the name, and then hit open. Okay, so this is better, right? You can kind of see we've got some detail there, but it doesn't look quite right. Something is not going right. It's because when you add an image texture, Blender doesn't really know what type of information it is yet, and by default, it's looking at the color information, even though there isn't really color there. So instead, we need to tell Blender this is a special map, and we're just looking at the values, right? So essentially, the color space here, we need to change it from sRGB, where it's a standard photo color, to instead non-color data, or just non-color, I guess they've changed it. Um, but now you can see that looks correct, right? So look at all that. We got scratches, we got smudges. It's infinitely more realistic than what we had previously. So beyond that, though, we could also add in little tiny bumps, okay? So bumps are in a place you would not expect. There's not a bump value here. It's actually under normal. So normal, you hear that word a lot in 3D. It just basically means the face, which direction is the face pointing, right? So if this is your face of the plane, you're pointing this way, that's the normal, right? But you can change the normal information to kind of tweak it to pretend like there is detail in that, okay? Essentially, we can plug in a specialized map called a normal map. Okay, so we're going to drag out from that normal map and then release and then image texture. That's the last use thing. That's the one we want. I'm just going to click color, then drop, and then hit open. Go to that same folder, and then this is the one, the purple one. It's the weirdest looking map. You always know you're looking at a CG texture map directory because it's the purple one and it's got NRM in the name for normal. And hit open. And just like before, it's not going to be correct because it thinks this is a color image texture, just like for photos. So we need to change it again to non-color data. And now you would think that would fix it, but no, it looks even worse. What did we do? The problem is we need to convert this image text into something this can read. So we need to put another node in between here. So the node is found under Shift A for add, then vector normal map. So click and then just drop it here so it highlights between it and then just drop it. And it will now finally be correct. And if I go full screen with control space, I didn't mention that before, but yeah, control space, and then you can go full screen and you can see we've got very subtle little chips and divots across the texture along with those smudges, and it just looks way more believable. It means you don't have to worry about this part of your scene. It's just going to work and you're going to get all that detail for free, and just makes life a little bit easier. But it is a lot of work. Like what you've just made is a PBR shader, and yeah, it's a lot of work. All those little maps and everything, and having to know which setting is which. But it is a very common thing to learn, so that's why I wanted to include it in here. Um, if I could plug my own website again, though, I will say we did hear you because a lot of people say that. So we actually made an add-on called the Polygon add-on, which I'll actually show you how to install later on because that is actually important for 3D because you use a lot of add-ons. But to plug it very quickly, it actually does all of that without you having to leave Blender. So it'll download the texture for you. There we go. See, it's downloading. It's actually faster through the add-on. And then once you've got it, you just hit apply and then it will do all of that node work for you in the background and it'll just apply it to the mesh for you. So you don't have to do all that all the time. And in fact, most people, I think, if you're working on big scenes, you're using libraries, you're using add-ons like this, so you don't have to do it all manually all the time. But it is important to know the process, so that's why I wanted to show it. But anyways, this was our material and we are happy with it. Well done. Let's go back to the layout tab. And now we're going to do one more thing. So you see our donut base here. Let's just isolate this donut for one moment here by hitting forward slash, which I mentioned previously. Okay, when you're in forward slash, this is isolate mode, which means it's literally turning, which I mentioned previously. Okay, isolate this donut for one moment here by hitting forward slash, which I mentioned previously. Okay, when you're in forward slash, this is isolate mode, which means it's literally turning off everything, including the lamp, which is why it's dark. But if you turn on material preview, then you get this. So this is okay. But But if you turn isolate mode, which means it's literally turning off everything, including the lamp, which is why it's dark. But if you turn on material preview, then you get this. So this is okay. But if you look at real references of donuts, you'll see that it's typically whiter around the middle. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned before, the way it cooks, right? It's only like half submerged and then it's flipped. And it means that the bits that are closest to the surface are cooked less. So there's usually like a whiter part around the rim. And I mean, really, this is just an excuse to show you another part of Blender, which is texture paint. So at the top there, click the texture paint tab. And again, let's go into isolate mode with our donut there. Why are we not seeing? Okay, there we go. So what texture paint does is it lets you paint directly onto your mesh. Texture paint. So at the top there, click the texture paint tab. And again, let's go into isolate mode with our donut there. Why are we not seeing? Okay, there we go. So what texture paint does is it lets you paint directly onto your mesh. But if we texture with our donut there, why are we not? The time has finally come to decorate our delicious looking donut. Closest to the surface are cooked less. So there's usually like a whiter part around the rim. And I mean, really, this is just an excuse to show you another part of Blender, which is texture paint. So at the top there, click the texture paint tab. And again, let's go into isolate mode with our donut there. Why are we not seeing? Okay, there we go. So what texture paint does is it lets you paint directly onto your mesh. But if we try doing it, you can see nothing's happening. And it does give you a warning at the bottom, missing textures detected. So to paint, you're painting into an image and the image doesn't exist yet. So we have to give it one. So go to the material tab. And then here where we got base color, we set it up as yellow, but we're actually just going to override it now. So click that little yellow dot again and then say image texture. So now it's black, doesn't have an image. So, and instead of clicking open, we're going to click new. So we're going to be creating a brand new image. And let's call this donut base. We could make this higher res if we want, but don't. This is more than enough for a donut base. That's fine. And this will just save us time. The color, this will just fill the it'll fill the image for us with a flat color. So we're just going to go for something pretty similar to what we had before, a nice yellowy color like that. And by the way, make sure you're all the way bright, otherwise your donut is going to be a little bit dark. So yeah, there we go. All right, and then hit OK. And once we've done that, you should, I mean, it should be over there on the left-hand side, but if it doesn't pop up, you can just select it from the drop-down donut base, and there we go. Doesn't. And once we've done that, you should, I mean, it should be over there on the left-hand side, but if it doesn't pop up, you can just select it from the drop-down donut base, and there we go. So now we're in this state. Look what I can do. Ooh, fancy. So, I don't know why I said it like that. But we can paint directly onto our mesh. So to understand this, because it's kind of weird, you can also paint directly over here. And you might be thinking like, well, how does it know, like, how do I know which part over here is actually going to be painted over onto the donut there? You might not care, but it's actually good to understand how it works. So basically this mesh here, it has to be unwrapped over onto this left-hand side here, because that's the only way to, it has, it's actually good to understand how it works. So basically this mesh here, it has to be unwrapped over onto this. So basically this mesh here, but it's actually good to understand how it works. So basically this mesh here, it has to be unwrapped over onto this left-hand side here, because that's the only way to have a 2D texture, 2D flat image be applied to a mesh is to unwrap it in some way. I mean, there's projection. I'm not getting into that. To unwrap it. And unwrapping is essentially like, there is a meme actually that explains it. But if you have like a chocolate, right, that is wrapped in some tinfoil, if you flatten it out, that is essentially UV unwrapping. There are little places in that wrapping where there had to be a cut, right? And then that cut was wrapped around the object. That's what UV unwrapping is. So the reason this works for us is because the cuts are actually already in place for default objects. So this torus is already perfectly UV unwrapped, so we don't have to do anything. I did want to mention it though, because it's important to understand UV unwrapping. Anyways, so we could actually paint directly on here, as I mentioned. White is a little bit too extreme though. So I'm going to click that and choose a color. First of all, I'm going to select the eyedropper and then not click over here because that's got shading information. I'm going to click on the left-hand side so we get the exact color. And then I'm going to make it closer to white. So not fully white because that'll be too far, but closer to white. And I'm also going to change the strength of my brush. Yeah, I'll make it about halfway. And then now I can do paints across it. And this will enable you to get a much more natural feel because you'll have, just like, in fact, I might even go a little bit softer. And that way you can kind of just paint across it. And this is very forgiving because we've got icing that's going to go over the top of it. But that's good. We don't want it to be too extreme. Let's just make it, I might go the other way, make this a little bit more saturated. Anyways, that's basically all we need to do. We just want to make this a little too extreme. Let's just make it, I might go the other way, make this a little bit more saturated. Anyways, that's basically all we need to do. We just want to just dab our toes into the field of texture painting. I would say texture painting, by the way, it's one of the weaker areas of Blender. It's actually due for an update at some point in the future, but it doesn't do like, you can't paint into like the height information or the roughness information at the same time like you can with Substance Painter. But it's got basic functionality. Now, importantly, this is an image, but it's not saved into your blend file. It still needs to be manually saved. So see at the top left-hand corner there, it's got image with a star. If you see that star, it means you've got changes that haven't been saved. So we need to go image and then save and specify where are we going to put our image. Because if we don't do this, we're going to lose it. You've got changes that have top left are saved in information at the same time to like the texture painting. I would say texture painting, by the way, it's one of the weaker areas of Blender. It's actually due for an update at some point in the future, but it doesn't do like, you can't paint into like the height information or the roughness information at the same time like you can with Substance Painter. But it's got basic functionality. Now, importantly, this is an image, but it's not saved into your blend file. It still needs to be manually saved. So see at the top left-hand corner there, it's got image with a star. If you see that star, it means you've got changes that haven't been saved. So we need to go image and then save and specify where are we going to put our image. Because if we don't do this, we're going to lose it. So it has to be saved somewhere. So I'm just going to save it, yeah, anywhere. It has to be saved somewhere because it will not be saved as part of the blend file. Very important to know that. Otherwise, you can lose texture paint work that you've done. But there we go. So now to bring back everything, remember if it looks like, where's the rest of my scene gone? See the top left-hand corner? Local means it's isolated mode. So that means you just have to hit / again, and it brings back everything. And there we are. So that's the extent of this part of the tutorial. As I mentioned, some of you might be wondering, when are we going to make that lovely subsurface scattering? We're going to do that in the future after we do the sprinkles because it's too hard to see at this point. So there we go, guys. Join me in the next part, and I'll see you there. The time has finally come to decorate our delicious looking donut with some sprinkles. So the feature we need for that is called Geometry Nodes, and you can access it by going to the top of your screen. If you don't see it, just middle mouse drag across and you'll see the tab Geometry Nodes. Ooh. So it's adjusted your screen layout. Don't get disorientated. Your donut is still there. This screen on the left here, it's called the spreadsheet. Never needed it. Touch on wood, never will. So we can just close that, right click, join areas, and then just collapse it into it. Okay. So with your icing selected, click the new button. So welcome. Is actually come. The time has finally come to decorate our delicious looking donut with some sprinkles. So, the feature we need for this is called geometry nodes, and you can access it by going to the top of your screen. If you don't see it, just middle mouse drag across, and you'll see the tab geometry nodes. Ooh. So, it's adjusted your screen layout. Don't get disorientated. Your donut is still there. This screen on the left here, it's called the spreadsheet. Never needed it. Touch on wood, never will. So we can just close that, right click, join areas, and then just collapse it into it. Okay, so with your icing selected, click the new button. So welcome to the world of geometry nodes. So geometry nodes is actually a modifier. So when we hit new there, we've added in a modifier called geometry nodes. And what the modifier is doing is whatever we want it to. Okay, so what this section down here is, this is a node-based system, and it looks familiar, right? You got boxes with little lines, and it's the exact same type of system that was used in our materials, right? But it's a completely different system. Okay, so the same nodes will not be referenced between the completely different systems. So the way this works is our mesh that we've got here of our icing is what is being represented on the left-hand side with your input. It's then taking that mesh is what is being. So the way this works is our mesh that we've got here of our icing is what is being represented on the left-hand side with your input. It's then taking that mesh and it's feeding it all the way to the right, and it's going to spit out whatever is the its output. So currently, nothing has changed because there's nothing between those points. But if I was, for example, don't follow me, but just as an example, if I was to add a set position node, drop this in here, and then change the position of the icing along the Z axis, you can see it's raised it. Okay, now the mesh, if I go into edit mode, is still there. The mesh has not changed. So we're not actually moving the object. This is just happening after the fact via a modifier. Okay, now obviously this would be a rather pointless use for geometry nodes to move it, because you could just move it. But as an example, let's say, I don't know, you had a scene where lots of objects, some of them are raised, some of them are not, and you wanted to quickly change them. What you could do with geometry nodes, in this case, you could actually expose this offset value by dragging it to the left over here. And when you do that, you can see it's now appeared over here in our modifier stack. What that means is, whenever I'm in another part of Blender, say I'm like building stuff, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I need to quickly, change the height of that icing, I've got it there whenever I need to. So essentially, this system enables you to build your own tool that does something that you want it to do in a really flexible way. So it's really powerful. And before geometry nodes, I mean, Blender was kind of limited in what you can do, but I'll throw some examples here. But in the last 2 years since it's been in Blender, people have done some wild stuff with it. And most of this stuff really was was just not possible in Blender before without doing custom scripting. So it's really opened up the doors. So it is a very different system. Like, it's a different way of working than just hands-on in 3D. But it's a really flexible, really valuable system. So any time spent learning geometry nodes, I think, is time well spent. So we want to do sprinkles, and to do that we need to first of all scatter some points onto our mesh. So to do that, hit Shift A for add, and then we're looking for point, distribute points on faces. Okay, and then it's just it's just going to put you in a placement state, and if you just mouse over that line there till it lights up, if you click, it's going to automatically connect it for you. And now you can see we've got points on our icing and a density value. Great. But you might notice the icing has actually disappeared. Ooh. Now the reason for that is we've told it, okay, take that icing object and convert it into points and then just give us the points back. Okay, so what we need to do is say, yes, we want the points, but we also want the original mesh. So we can do that by adding in a node that you use all the time, which is Shift A, Geometry, Join Geometry. So you'll find this node in probably any geometry nodes tutorial. Very versatile. So drop it in here after the points, and you'll notice this input here is a different shape. So normally inputs are circles or triangles or whatnot. This one is a long and elongated shape to signify that it can accept multiple inputs. So unlike these where you can only accept one, this can accept many. So what we need to do is take the output of our original mesh and then feed it over to here. And now we have both the original mesh and we have our points, and they're being combined together and then put into our output. Okay, very cool, awesome. All right, so if we were to give this a render right now, you would actually see nothing because these points don't physically exist. They just exist in the 3D space. If we want them to show up in the render, we have to tell it, what do you want to render them as? So for that, we need to add an object to be our sprinkle. So your sprinkle could be whatever you want. We're actually going to make two different types of sprinkles in this donut series. So we're going to start though with a very simple one, just a round ball. So just like you would add another object normally, Shift A, and then go Mesh, and then go UV Sphere. Now, this sphere is going to be referenced for every single sprinkle. Okay, so we want to go to be ref and then go Mesh, just like you would add another object normally, Shift A, and then go Mesh, and then go UV Sphere. Now, this sphere is going to be referenced for every single sprinkle. Okay, so we want to go as low res as we can get away with. So I'm going to go with 12 segments and then 8 rings. If you're on a really slow computer and you think this is really going to suffer later on, you could go so I'm going to go with 12 segments and then 8 rings. If you're on a really slow computer and you think this is really going to suffer later on, you could go even lower, but I don't want to go too low because otherwise we're going to see that jagged edge because it's a rounded form. So I don't want to go too much lower than that. But I do want to adjust the scale because obviously this needs to be a tiny little sprinkle. So let's go 0.01. Okay, awesome. All right, now with our icing selected again, you'll notice, by the way, that if you click another object, you don't see your nodes because it's only going to show you the active object's geometry nodes. So if you want the nodes to just be there no matter what, if you click the pin button there, that means no matter what is selected, it's only going to be showing you this object's, the one that we pinned, geometry nodes. Okay. All right, so to reference, we need to reference that little sphere that we've just created in our geometry node system. And you can do it very easily just by dragging down from your outline up here, just dragging it down into your geometry nodes and dropping it. Okay, so now let's just create some room here. Make a little bit of space. Okay, and what I need to do is add another node to reference this object. And the node is Shift A, instances, instances on points, the top one. Okay, and then I want to drop it in here between distribute points on faces and my join geometry. So drop it in right there till it lights up. Now the points have disappeared because we're now saying replace those points with whatever is in that instance input. So I'm going to take my geometry from my object info and drag it into the instance. And look at that. We have got our spheres appearing all over it. And if I increase the density, we've got sprinkles. And if I do a render, it will actually display. Doesn't look very good, hey, but it does work, which is the main thing right now. Okay, so first things first, you'll notice that as we increase the density, first problem is that they're crowding each other. They are straight up overlapping each other with no respect for its fellow sprinkle, right? Because it's just a random distribution. So we can change that by going here in our distribute points on faces, change it from random distribution to Poisson disk distribution. Poisson, what a name. Um, so it's changed, but that's just because it's changed your density max. So just increase it again. Um, with this Poisson disk distribution, you get this extra value here, distance min. So now if we can set a low value, distance is, but that's just because it's changed your density max. So just increase it again. With this Poisson disk distribution, you get this extra value here, distance min. So now if we can set a low value, we can start to delete. It's almost like each one of those points now is going to have a little radius around it. And if it detects a point within that radius, it's going to delete it. So we just need to increase it slowly, very, very slowly, until we can't see them intersecting anymore. To about there, honestly. If you go too high, like if you really wanted to make sure they weren't touching, you go really high, but it starts to look like too evenly spaced, like, yeah, it's not actually registering the other objects. It's like it's just doing this little radius thing, which just happens to be perfect for a ball-shaped object, but it's not like an advanced, like it's going to try to fill in all the gaps for you. So yeah, you just kind of, I usually set it to like a little bit of clipping is okay, but I don't want there to be too much. But let's go, yeah, something, I don't know, something like that. We'll actually adjust this later on. I'm just doing it just for this point. All right, a much bigger problem, if I hit Control Tab to go full screen here, if I look at my mesh, I've got sprinkles everywhere. And in fact, I've actually got sprinkles underneath the icing. And that's not good because it's actually going to put that in the render. Even though you won't see it, your computer is going to use resources to render little individual balls underneath the icing, which is not what we want, obviously. So, going back here, what we need to do to fix this is we need to do weight painting, okay? It's not texture painting, it's a special thing called weight painting. So with your icing selected, if you go from your object mode, you'll see one there called weight paint. Now, your mesh will become blue, and weight paint is actually referenced in multiple parts of Blender. Like if you're doing rigging and animation, you would use weight painting a lot during the rigging step to assign values to certain bones. Essentially, what it's doing is it's allowing you to paint a value between 0 and 1 onto any part of the mesh, and then reference that however you want. So we can then reference that weight paint mask in our geometry nodes and use this almost as, well, exactly as a mask for our sprinkles. So if we just do some paint right here on it, you'll see that we have some colors, right? Now these colors aren't going to appear in the render. It's just for you to visualize those values. The blue value means a value of 0, and the red value is a 0 of 1. I believe actually in maybe not the next version of Blender, but maybe the version, I don't know, but they're planning to change the colors of this. So depending on the value, on how late watching this you are, your colors might be different here, but it should be the same. Essentially, you should have a brush of 1, and you should be able to paint from 0, which would give a blue value in this case, to a value of 1. So whatever is 1, whatever is red, is where our sprinkles will go. But you'll notice that this is not having any effect, okay? So we need to reference it. Now, that weight paint that we just did is actually, if we go to our data tab here, it's actually a vertex group, okay? So that's where that paint went. So you could actually create multiple weight paint types just by like creating them here. But we've just created one and it's added one here for us. So we can give it a name by double clicking it, and let's call it sprinkle mask. Okay. In fact, is it a mask? It's more of a density, sprinkle density, I guess, because it's not a masking out. Anyway, all right, sprinkle density. Okay, and where I want to reference this in my geometry node stack is in the distribute points on faces, there is one value here called density factor, which we got when we used the Poisson disk thing. And this is just a value of 0 to 1. Very convenient. So if I drag out from here and then release, I can add in a new node and it'll just automatically connect it. And the node that you're looking for is called the named attribute. Don't feel bad if you're like, well, how would I know that it's called the named attribute? Because it's called vertex groups over here. You think like, okay, I'm going to type in vertex group, but it's an attribute, but it's one of many attributes, and geometry nodes can do many things, so it's just called the named attribute. So anyways, all right, so underneath name, we're just going to click that box and you'll get a pop-up or pop-down, and you're looking for sprinkle density. And there it is. Haha. So now going back into weight paint mode, we can act like an artist and put the sprinkles wherever we want, sprinkles on our donut, which is really cool. So sprinkles are typically, they're like on a plate, and then the wet donut with icing on it is just like dabbed onto it. So you get like a heavy amount of sprinkles right on the top like that, and then less around the sides. Um, and then I usually do like a few like dabs like this, just for some variance. And then also, if you hold down Control, that will do a, so the weight that's being painted is 1, but if I hold down Control, it's going to do a negative value. And I can adjust my strength there as well, and I can just do some negative paints across it, maybe a couple here as well. Control, that will do a, so the weight that's being painted is 1, but if I hold down Control, it's going to do a negative value. And I can adjust my strength there as well, and I can just do some negative paints across it, maybe a couple here as well. And I'm trying to deliberately make it look choppy, because I find that if you make it look too like uniform, then it just looks very boring and artificial. Because the real world would have more sprinkles collecting in certain areas than others, right? Maybe it's just like wetter on that part, right? So more would, just for some variance. And then also, if you hold down Control, that will do a negative and I can adjust my strength 1, but if I hold down Control, it's going to do a negative value. And I can adjust my strength there as well, and I can just do some negative paints across it, maybe a couple here as well. And I'm trying to deliberately make it look choppy, because I find that if you make it look too like uniform, then it just looks very boring and artificial. Because the real world would have more sprinkles collecting in certain areas than others, right? Maybe it's just like wetter on that part, right? So more would stick to it, or more force was put on that part of the plate as the donut was dabbed into it, right? You just kind of have to think of this stuff, because in the digital world, it's far too easy to make something that looks predictable and boring, and we don't want that. But there we go, something like that. And you could obviously finesse it and make it better than what it is, but that's what we've got. You'll notice each of these spheres have a very jagged looking shape, and that's because you'll notice each of these finesse it and make it better than what it is, but that's what we've got. You'll notice obviously finesse, and we don't want that. But there we go, something like that. And you could obviously finesse it and make it better than what it is, but that's what we've got. You'll notice boring, and we don't want that. But there we go, something like that. And you could obviously finesse it and make it better than what it is, but that's what we've got. You'll notice each of these spheres have a very jagged looking shape, and that's because the sphere itself down here have a very better than. But there we go, something like that. And you could obviously finesse it and make it better than what it is, but that's what we've got. You'll notice each of these spheres have a very jagged looking shape, and that's because the sphere itself down here. Oh, I don't think I mentioned this. If you want to quickly zoom to an object without having to find it and pan around, number pad period key. Probably should have mentioned that before, but we haven't really needed it because we haven't not worked with that many objects. But that'll focus to that object. If you're on a laptop, by the way, if you hold down the tilde key, that'll bring up this section here, and then you've got view selected right there. So tilde is that key underneath your escape key. But anyways, so this is what our sphere looks like. So right click, shade smooth, and now all those sprinkles have a shade smooth. Haha, very nice. All right, now let me just show you a quick little issue that you might run into. If you were to duplicate your donut and create two, and then on the second donut, you're like, hey, I want to have some spice in my scene. I don't want to have the exact same count of sprinkles across both donuts. Let's give a different value to this one over here. Well, you can see see that they are now sharing the same value because this node group here is being linked across both objects. Um, but if you wanted, I mean, you could like, make it its own single object so that they're not linked. But if you wanted everything else to remain the same, so that let's say you change the sprinkle at some point, that's preserved across it. But that one value you want to be different across multiple objects, you can expose it. So just like what I did at the start, if I drag out from the value I want to expose, and then I put it up to here in my group input, the empty slot, if I just release it, it's now disappeared. The value's disappeared from here, and it's now appeared in my modifier stack over here. And now I can put in a different value. So this has now got a value of 2000, and this one is 500. So essentially, by dragging it out and exposing it, it's essentially removing the value from this node setup and saying this is its own separate thing, which is independent per object. And it has a two birds, one stone kind of effect that it makes it more accessible. So in a completely different part of Blender, I'm working on my scene and I'm just very quickly giving different sprinkle amounts to different donuts, right? Out from the value. Anything else to remain. Show you a quick little issue that you might run into. If you were to duplicate your donut and create two, and then on the second donut, you're like, hey, I want to have donut and create two, and then on the if you were to duplicate your donut and create two, and then on the second donut, you're like, hey, I want to have some spice in my scene. I don't want to have the exact same count of sprinkles across both donuts. Let's give a different value to this one over here. Well, you can see that they are now sharing the same value because this node group here is being linked across both objects. But if you wanted, I mean, you could like, make it its own single object so that they're not linked. But if you wanted everything else to remain the same, so that let's say you change the sprinkle at some point, that's preserved across it. But that one value you want to be different across multiple objects, you can expose it. So just like what I did at the start, if I drag out from the value I want to expose, and then I put it up to here in my group input, the empty slot, if I just release it, it's now disappeared. The value's disappeared from here, and it's now appeared in my modifier stack over here. And now I can put in a different value. So this has now got a value of 2000, and this one is 500. So essentially, by dragging it out and exposing it, it's essentially removing the value from this node setup and saying this is its own separate thing, which is independent per object. And it has a two birds, one stone kind of effect that it makes it more accessible. So in a completely different part of Blender, I'm working on my scene and I'm just very quickly giving different sprinkle amounts to different donuts, right? Like a madman, right? No one can stop me. But yeah, very cool. And that's now exposed. Oh, the other thing we probably want to do though with that this group input here is I want to give it a different name because density max, not really that useful. I can call it sprinkle density, right? So now it's like a fully customized little node group that I could drop on any object. I could be building a car in the future, and I'm like, it needs. It has a two bird thing. Working on my scene like a mad. No one can stop me. Sprinkle amounts to different donuts, right? Like a madman, right? No one can stop me. Completely different part of two birds. I'm working on my right, like and this group input here is I want to give it a different name because density. Very cool. And that's now exposed. Oh, the other thing we probably want to do though with that this group input here is I want to give it a different name because density max, not really that useful. I can call it sprinkle density. With that this group input here is I want to give it a different name because density max with that this group input here is I want to give it a different name because density max, not really that useful. I can call it sprinkle density, right? So now it's like a fully customized little node group that I could drop on any object. I could be building a car in the future, and I'm like, it needs sprinkles, and I can just drop this on it, and I've got a sprinkle density value for my car, right? So you can see how geometry nodes, you can build something really customized for what you want, and then it's just readily accessible every time you need to use it. Now it's like a fully customized little node group that I could drop on any object. I could be building sprinkling. Now it's like a fully, I can call it, I want to give it a different name because density max, not really that useful. I can call it sprinkled density, right? So now it's like a fully customized little node group that I could drop on any object. I could be building a car in the future, and I'm like, it needs sprinkles. And I can just drop this on it, and I've got a sprinkle density value for my car, right? So you can see how geometry nodes, you can build something really customized for what you want, and then it's just readily accessible every time you need to use it. Awesome. Now, one issue that I will show you with this, and actually it's not specific to geometry nodes, but this entire time for all these videos, we've been building a donut which is too big. So if you hit N in your properties, oh, that's the polygon thing, you can see the size, the dimensions of your donut is 1.2 by 1.2 meters, which is 1.2 by 1.2 meters, which for Americans, oh, actually, yeah, you can change it. You could change your units to the wacky imperial one. Yeah, 4 feet, right? Okay. Um, which is way too big. Okay. Now, why does it matter, right? Because, like, okay, if you're looking at this, how are you to actually know that this is 1.2 meters rather than the regular size donut? It doesn't actually matter yet, but when we get to like rendering with depth of field, or maybe you want to import other objects from other scenes, having a value that is actually true to the object will save you so much time, and it'll also make it so that your camera settings, etc., are actually correct. So that bit is very important. So essentially, we should resize this. And really, a real donut is about 12 centimeters, which is exactly 1/10 of what we've got right here. So if we select everything in the entire scene, which you can do by just hitting A for everything, I don't know, A for all, yeah, that makes more sense. Okay. Then if we hit S to scale, okay, we're now in a scale. Oh, actually, okay. Well, now it's going to scale it, and the plane is going to be off the ground. Okay. All right. Well, let's not scale the lamp and the camera. So everything else, selecting the donut, the lamp, sorry, the donut, the plane, and the sphere. Then S, and then I want to scale it by exactly 10%. Now, how could I do that? Well, if you look in the top left-hand corner, you've got the values there. And if I went to 0.1, then it would be exactly a tenth of what it was. But how can I get it exactly at 0.1? Well, two things. One, if you hold down Control, when you're moving any value in Blender, it'll move it in increments, which in this case is 0.1. But you can also actually just type in the exact value you want, 0.1, and hit Enter. And now, if we look at the size of our donut, click N, hit N, you can see it's 0.12 meters or centimeters. You know, hit N. You can see it now. If we look at the size of our donut, click and hit Enter. Actually, just type in the exact value you want, zero point 0.1, and hit Enter. And now, if we look at the size of our donut, click N, hit N, you can see it's 0.12 meters or when you change the scale or the rotation of an object, actually, it's not it's only changed its what do you call it? Its local scale. It hasn't actually applied it on a global level yet. So the sprinkle here and the donut have actually got a like pretend value. The scale is set at point 0.2, and it's almost like it's saying to the scene, that's not its real scale. It's just been faked to be that size yet. It needs to be applied if you want to like confirm really that this is the true scale or rotation of the thing. And you do that by selecting the things and then hitting Control A and then applying scale. Okay, so now we've done that, we can see something's changed. So our donut here with the sprinkles has now massively changed its density count. And the reason for this is that if we go geometry nodes again, let's zoom in here, let's look at it with this. This density, this sprinkle density, is actually not the count of sprinkles at all. It's the density in relation to the whole scene. And the way I think of it is like here, okay, this is the it's saying needs to be that's on a global level yet. So the sprinkle here and the donut have actually got a like pretend value. The scale is set at point 0.2, and it's almost like it's saying to the scene, that's not its real scale. It's just been faked to be that size yet. It needs to be applied if you want to like confirm really that this is the true scale or rotation of the thing. And you do that by selecting the things and then hitting Control A and then applying scale. Okay, so now we've done that, we can see something's changed. So our donut here with the sprinkles has now massively changed its density count. And the reason for this is that if we go geometry nodes again, let's zoom in here, let's look at it with this. This density, this sprinkle density, is actually not the count of sprinkles at all. It's the density in relation to the whole scene. And the way I think of it is like okay, it's a weird visualization, but if you've got a car and it's driving along a highway, right, a certain amount of bugs are going to hit the windshield, okay? but and the bugs could be defined by here, but the smaller the object is, right, you could have the same amount of bugs going across the highway, but if it was like a tiny matchbox car, there's going to be very few bugs that's going to hit it, okay? So the density is kind of like the density of the world, and now that we've made the object smaller, there's only 3 sprinkles left. There's only 3 bugs that's hit the windshield of our donut here. So this value now needs to be much bigger. In fact, it needs to be exactly like if it was 6,000 before, it would need to be, yeah, 60,000 now. Um, but the problem is that it's not just a value here. The distance min value has also changed because this is also based on a real world value. So this now needs to be really small. So let's try 0.01, and that's actually pretty good, I think. There's a little bit of overlap, but that's roughly kind of what we want. And let's see if I can increase this. Yeah, so if I want this density to be really dense, yeah, I would have to increase it to a crazy number. Now, something I like to do personally, this isn't, you have to do this, but you notice how like this number is really large. And if I want to increase or lower my sprinkle value, and I'm in a different part of Blender, if I'm just dragging this value, it's having no effect because the range, like the scale of it is just so large. So what I actually do is I set it to a value that I think makes sense, which in this case is 200. And then whatever the value was before, it was 200,000, right? I do a math value inside of my geometry node setup between here and here. I do a math calculation to multiply that by the value that it needs to be, almost as like a scale adjustment. So you can do it with just one node, Shift A, Utilities, Math, Math, and just drop it in here. Now the math, I said I want to multiply it, so I need to change it from add to a multiply. And math is the most versatile of any node. You can do all sorts of stuff, but multiply. So multiply, and it was 200,000 before. So if I want this value 200, then I just add 1,000. Yes, that's correct. Okay. So now I can very quickly change the scale of the sprinkles across the donut without having to like manually type in the value. I can just move it back and forth. And there you go. So that's it. So we've changed the scale of it to what it should be. We've got a correct density. Sorry, we've got a correct sprinkle sprinkle setup looking good. In the next part, we are going to be adding long sprinkles to our donuts because this round one is okay. And I originally was just going to go round to try and keep it simple, but there's also, I don't know, the long sprinkles just look way nicer. But you do have to do some different rotation math and stuff. So we're going to do that in a whole second video. So click here on the screen to learn all about that and random colors. So I will see you in that part.
Mm, thank you.